Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jordan Stark and I'm part of the marketing team at Canadian Fertility Consulting, and I'm happy to be here with our speakers today to discuss surrogacy in Canada. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join us. While we're waiting, I'd like to introduce our three speakers here with us today. We have Stephen Page of Page Provan Family and Fertility Lawyers in Brisbane, Australia. Stephen and his husband are dads through surrogacy. Their daughter is about to turn 9 months old. Stephen was admitted as a solicitor in 1987 and has since advised about 1,600 surrogacy journeys, the first in 1988 for clients throughout Australia and in 31 other countries. Stephen is a fellow of the International Academy of Family Lawyers as well as the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. He is an international representative on the Art Committee of the American Bar Association. We also have Alex MacNab with us from Mohana LLP Family Lawyers in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Alex and his husband have one child through surrogacy and egg donation. Alex also volunteers as the president of the non-for-profit branch of their fertility clinic in Calgary, which provides funds to people who need fertility treatments that cannot afford it. We also have Leia Swanberg, founder and CEO of Canadian Fertility Consulting and Egg Helpers, located in Ontario and British Columbia, Canada. Leia is a mother to 5, a 2-time gestational surrogate, and a 6-time egg donor. She began Canadian Fertility Consulting in 2007 after her second surrogacy, with the intention of creating a more rewarding surrogacy experience for both intended parents and surrogates. With a background in business development and management, Leia turned her personal passion for alternative family building into a full-time business. CFC believes that surrogacy is more than a medical transaction. Bringing one's child into the world through surrogacy is a milestone that deserves to be honored and celebrated. I'd like to thank everyone who's just joining us now to our webinar. Now, before we get started, I have a few more housekeeping items. Number one is that we know everyone is at home right now, so in the case that you have any internet connection issues, please call in using a phone and the number provided in your webinar registration email. Item number 2 is that we would like you to be aware that we are recording this webinar today, and everyone who registered will be sent a direct link to watch this again later. It will also be made available on our website, YouTube, and Facebook channels. You'll be receiving all of our speakers' contact information with this email so that you will be able to book one-on-one consultations if you have further questions. And number 3 is that we will be taking questions all throughout the webinar. If you do have any questions, please use the questions tab and please let us know who your questions for, and we'll be doing live Q&A sessions with all of our speakers. If we don't have time for your question, we'll make sure that you get connected with the speaker afterwards. All right, so I think we're ready to begin. I'll invite Alex to join us on screen. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Jordan.
Let's get started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jordan and CFC for organizing this great event. And thanks for Stephen for joining us as well. Canada is a great option for people to consider for their surrogacy journeys. In Canada, we have strong and clear legislation stating that surrogacy is legal. We have legislation in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario as well, which states that a person who donates human reproductive material for somebody else's reproductive purposes is not considered to be a parent of that child born. Canada has a great social healthcare system, which is accessible to all Canadians. So what this means is that all of your baby's prenatal care will be covered by your surrogate's healthcare through Canada. It's important for all intended parents to understand, though, that once your baby is born, you will be responsible for any post-birth medical costs. So as part of the process, it's important that you get educated and understand the different types of insurance products out there to assist you and help you if there's any emergent post-birth medical care. In Canada, all types of families are welcome, and it is illegal in Canada to discriminate against another party, and this includes discrimination based on sexual orientation. The federal government does not care whether you're single, heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered. All parties have the right to have children and a family, and that right is supported and protected in Canada. There are 3 legal processes that you would have to be aware about as it relates to your surrogacy journey: your egg donation agreement, your surrogacy agreement, and your parentage process once your baby is born. It's important that in all three stages you have experienced legal help to help navigate you through that process. There are two types of egg donation agreements, anonymous and known agreements. Obviously, in one scenario, the identities of the parties are not known if it's anonymous, and in the other scenario, parties know each other's identities. The choice whether you actually proceed with a known or an anonymous donation is a personal one, which you should make in consultation with your agency and your lawyer. In both scenarios, it's important that you have a good egg donation agreement in place to help you. Your agreement will ensure to the best that it can that your donor is being truthful regarding all medical and genetic history that she's providing. The agreement will also ensure that despite your donor's genetic link to your child, that she has no parental rights and that you are the only parents of your child. The agreement will indicate that this is an altruistic process and not commercial. It will require you to advise your donor through the clinic or the agency, or directly perhaps if it's a known donation, if you have a child, so that all parties will have some basic information about genetically related children that exist. Your donor will also be obligated to provide that same information to you through the clinic, agency, or to you directly. The agreement will also ensure that if there's a need for medical information from your donor at some point in the future, that donor will respond and provide that medical information to you if she has it available. Perhaps the most important part of your egg donation agreement is the issue of risk. Your donor, in consultation with her own lawyer and with the clinic, will sign the contract saying she's fully aware of the process and all risks that are involved, and she's releasing you both from liability. So what that means is, if anything happened to your donor, she would not have the ability to sue you. The second legal process that you have to be aware about is your surrogacy agreement. You must have a surrogacy agreement in place before proceeding with a surrogacy in Canada. The surrogacy agreement will set out the intentions of all parties. It will require you to address issues such as a termination of a pregnancy, selective reduction, the surrogate's ability to travel during a pregnancy, whether she's going to work with a midwife or a doctor, communication between the parties, and as well as any sort of dispute resolution, if there was any sort of a dispute during your process. Perhaps the most important part, though, of your surrogacy agreement is the issue and the section dealing with expenses. In Canada, it is illegal to pay a surrogate any sort of compensation to carry your child. You're only allowed to reimburse the surrogate out-of-pocket expenses. This is an interesting area in Canadian law, and one that has changed reasonably recently. Until recently, there was no definition regarding what a reimbursable expense was. Our legislation actually contemplated that a surrogate was entitled to her reasonable out-of-pocket expenses in accordance with the regulations. However, we had no regulations dealing with actually defining what a reimbursable expense was or is. So the previous practice was that any expense directly related to the process, as long as considered reasonable, would be reimbursable. Recently, the federal government has actually published regulations defining what a reimbursable expense is. Those regulations come into force in June of 2020. All surrogacy agreements that have been drafted perhaps in the last year have contemplated those regulations. The bottom line is for intended parents, the law has become stronger and more clear as it relates to expenses that you reimburse your surrogate. I suggest to all of my clients that they work with a competent surrogacy agency during their journey. One of the reasons for that is for the reimbursement of expenses. That is, the liability under the law lies on the intended parents and not the surrogate as it relates to reimbursement of expenses. Therefore, it is important that you get help from a reputable professional agency to help you navigate that process. The final legal process that you're going to have to deal with is your actual parentage process. In Canada, federal legislation governs your donor and your surrogacy agreement. What that means is Any lawyer across the country can help you with your surrogacy and donation agreement, no matter where your surrogate or donor lives within the country. However, the issue of your parentage process is governed provincially. And what that means is once you're pregnant and once you're in your second trimester, if you are working with a surrogate that's in a different jurisdiction from your lawyer will refer you to one of their colleagues in that province to help you navigate that process. In Canada, there are two processes dealing with parentage. There's your parentage declaration and a statutory declaration process. In most provinces, the parentage declaration is available, and the difference between the two processes is one involves the court process and one does not. So your parentage declaration is one that involves the actual court process. Once your baby is born, then there will be documentation signed between you and your surrogate and your partners. And with that documentation, you will get a judgment of the court saying that you are the only parents of your child, and your surrogate and her partner, if she has one, are not parents. Once you have that judgment, you can go to Vital Statistics and get your birth certificate. The birth certificate can have either one of you or both of you on it. It is your choice. And depending on, of course, legal advice that you receive from your lawyer in your home jurisdiction. Once you have your birth certificate, then you can apply for your Canadian passport, your child's Canadian passport, and you can fly home with that document. If you're in a jurisdiction that has a statutory declaration process, you can avoid the court process and all parties will sign sworn documents saying that you are in compliance with the law, that you're going through a surrogacy process. And with that sworn document, you can go get your birth certificate and your passport. The decision on whether or not you work with a statutory declaration process or a parentage declaration should be made in consultation with the lawyer in your home jurisdiction. Those are the main areas in dealing with the legal process of Canadian surrogacy. Of course, one issue that we're all dealing with now that we were not dealing with recently is COVID-19. So in Canada, there has been a process put in place by Cindy Wasser, who's a lawyer in Ontario, and in consultation with other colleagues, so that there is a process in place to ensure that you can get into Canada for your baby when that baby is born and then return home. Those are the main issues from a high-level perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Alex. We do have a question here from some intended parents. So they are wondering, can their surrogate come to Australia for an embryo transfer?
I presume that that's a possibility. I mean, the issue, of course, that you're going to have to address is the logistics on the cost of doing that. I haven't had experience myself where the surrogate has actually traveled to Australia to have a transfer, but it is a possibility. We do have surrogates that travel out of the country for transfers, mainly to the US. I have not had a client specifically fly to Australia for that purpose, but I'm sure that it is a possibility.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of that great information, Alex. Next, I will have Stephen join us on screen. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I just want to respond to that question first, and that is whether a surrogate in Canada can come to Australia for embryo transfer. Yes, it can happen. I have seen that. It depends on where in Australia. Some parts of Australia it can't happen. For example, it can't happen in Victoria. There are issues of cost, and one of the tricks for any Australians undertaking surrogacy in Canada is to make sure that you comply with Australian law. And in various parts of Australia, particularly New South Wales, Queensland, the ACT, and a grey area in South Australia and Western Australia, you might be committing an offence relating to commercial surrogacy. So it's a question of how much you spend, whether it's reasonable, whether it fits within the requirements here. Generally, I don't recommend it. Generally, it's easier for you to go over to Canada to undertake the surrogacy in Canada. I want to thank Jordan and CFC for the invitation to speak today, and I think that Alex just gave a great overview of the situation in Canada. Canada is a great location for surrogacy. It has a good human rights framework. It has a good legal framework. As Alex said, it's got both federal laws and provincial laws. It has good healthcare and good cost for the baby and surrogate up to the time of birth. There are issues, as Alex said, about providing for the costs of the baby post-birth, so that requires, in my view, to ensure that there is insurance in place and that care is taken with that. From a legal point of view, the issues in dealing with Canada are first to ensure that the egg donation agreement isn't in breach of any local Australian laws. It is an offence in Australia, throughout Australia, except WA, where it's slightly less, that to enter into a commercial egg donor agreement as defined under Australian law is punishable by up to 15 years imprisonment. In WA, it's 10 years. Most Australian states have a requirement of what is called a long arm law. This says that even if you're in, say, Sydney and you enter into an agreement in Canada, you might be in breach of laws in New South Wales. So great care needs to be taken to make sure that you don't breach that. Similarly, with entering into the surrogacy agreement, care has to be taken, again, that you don't breach any commercial surrogacy laws in Australia. Although surrogacy and egg donation in Canada are altruistic, that's under Canadian law. We also have to make sure that there's compliance with Australian law. One of the great benefits in going to Canada is that if you have embryos created here first in Australia, then you will be able to export them, hopefully without too much difficulty, to Canada, and then be able to use them in your journey over there. If, however, you've got a donor for those embryos, then there are issues if you're in Western Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. So you either have to get the consent of the donor or you have to get consent of the statutory authority, the Reproductive Technology Council in Western Australia or the Victorian Assisted Reproductive Treatment Authority in Victoria. So the journey of undertaking surrogacy internationally is the most complex form of the most complex way of becoming parents, namely through surrogacy. But the point is, it's doable, and Canada is a safe location to undertake surrogacy. When it comes to egg donation, my view is quite clear, and that is, if you have the choice between an anonymous and a known donor, always choose a known donor. This doesn't mean that the donor is a parent, she won't be, but this is so that your child in growing up will know where he or she has come from. There is nothing quite like meeting donor-conceived adults who say that they don't know where they've come from to realise that this can be both a problem for them and also their parents. I agree wholeheartedly with what Alex has said, which is to have a competent surrogacy agency. Having a professional surrogacy agency can make sure that the matching is done right, that you also have complete control over the expenses and that you're not inadvertently committing a breach of Canadian law. Coming home in the past has been really straightforward. At the moment, coronavirus has made this extraordinarily difficult. We know with coronavirus that at the moment there is no new IVF occurring, and I've been asked the question, well, does that mean we should be putting our plans to become parents on hold? My view about that is no, you should still be proceeding. At the moment we are having a delay. This is an amber light as opposed to a red light. The system will start up again. You will be able to get through the process again, and I'd certainly be urging people not to put everything on absolute hold, because if everyone else does the same, then you're going to be at the end of a very, very long queue at that time. It's better to do your planning now and move whatever forward you can do. Usually in coming home, the process is that you obtain a Canadian court order, and generally I recommend obtaining an order. It makes the ability to obtain Australian citizenship easier, and if it's drafted right, it makes it easier to obtain Australian passports for your child as they mature, as opposed to having to obtain the consent of the Canadian surrogate. Once you've got that passport and the birth certificate in hand, then the usual process in the past has been to obtain an Australian Electronic Travel Authority. This typically takes 10 or 15 minutes online. Then book your travel, then come home. And then once home, apply for Australian citizenship. It's trickier at the moment. At the moment, there is a travel ban in going over to Canada. That means, in a practical sense, of being at the birth, but it shouldn't hold up the other parts of the process, namely entering into the egg donor agreement or entering into the surrogacy agreement, or indeed engaging a surrogacy agency. None of that should be held up at the moment from coronavirus. Once you are able to leave Australia and navigate the travel ban, if you have that problem and we're helping clients through that, then there's an issue of getting into Canada. What I've certainly seen, and Alex has alluded to, is that if you have a child being born through a Canadian surrogacy process, there shouldn't be great difficulty in getting into Canada. I've had clients who have managed to do that. Then coming home, the difficulty, there will be some delays in Canada in obtaining a birth certificate and Canadian passport, but the greater difficulty will be that the Electronic Travel Authority no longer exists. It's been frozen by the Australian government. Instead, you'll have to obtain a visa. This is a process of making an appointment, and it'll really depend on the consulate that you go to about how quick they are. It's just a waiting game. I don't anticipate that it will hold up the process terribly much. It's probably a greater difficulty at the moment in getting flights back. But nevertheless, Australians are able to get into Canada, and they are able to get home. So with that conclusion, I don't anticipate that there will be a problem at this end in showing that you are an Australian citizen parent. The test for Australian citizenship is that at the time of the child's birth, there is an Australian citizen parent, and this is someone who is seen in the wider view of society as a parent. Typically, if you have a court order from Canada showing you as a parent, you'll be recognised here as a parent for citizenship. And the effect of a decision of the High Court last year involving a man who supplied sperm to a female friend in order for him to become a parent means that the same test has been adopted under family law, which means that if you are recognised in the wider view of society as a parent, then you're recognised as a parent for the purposes of family law. Again, what this means in a practical sense is if you obtain an order from a Canadian court that says you're a parent, then in my view, you would be shown to be a parent here. And I think that's it for me for the moment, subject to any questions. Jordan?
Thank you, Stephen. That was great information. We do have a question here. A couple is wanting to know, do they need to have a donor agreement if she's anonymous, if the egg donor is anonymous?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because what you want to have in that agreement are a number of things. One, that the egg donor, of course, isn't a parent, that the two of you are to be the parents. This has got to be crystal clear. The second is to make sure that any reimbursement to the egg donor is altruistic. And this is a requirement of Canadian law, which Alex referred to before, but it's also, you want to make sure it is absolutely plain for Australian legal purposes, that you didn't breach any Australian laws in your egg donor arrangements. If you don't have a genetic relationship with your child, then the Australian government says that absolute scrutiny to the maximum extent possible must be undertaken to ensure that you haven't engaged in child trafficking because of Australia's international obligations against child trafficking. What this means in practice is it really depends on the officer you deal with in the Department of Home Affairs who determines citizenship. And of course, you don't have a choice about who you have as your officer. If there isn't a genetic link by an Australian parent, so if you have a heterosexual couple and the man is an Australian citizen and his sperm was used, then that isn't an issue. But if neither of you, or if there's only one of you and there's no genetic link to an Australian citizen parent, then there ought to be careful planning done. And there are a series of steps that just need to be undertaken as a form of homework to make sure that there's a clear documentary, evidentiary trail, so that if you have an officer who wants to scrutinise the matter to the absolute maximum extent, you've got that to produce and say, here it is. I had such a matter last year, but there was quite an officer who wanted to scrutinise to the maximum extent, and I helped my clients prepare a statute declaration, which then set out at length all the efforts that they went to. They sent off their statement by email, and 1 hour and 36 minutes later, they got their child's citizenship certificate back by email.
That's great. Thank you so much. We do have another question here for you. They would like to know, does our child end up with a Canadian passport or is it an Australian passport, and how does that work?
Okay. The child being born in Canada is entitled to Canadian citizenship. So the usual way that you would come home with your child is to ensure that your child obtains a Canadian passport. And the practice has been, until coronavirus, to get an electronic travel authority and then fly home. So your child flies home as a Canadian citizen who in effect is a tourist coming to Australia. Clients have asked me in the past, well, is there a problem when we land in Australia, which typically has been Brisbane or Sydney? And the answer is no. You simply go through border control and then go home and then apply for Australian citizenship. You can be both a dual citizen in Canada and in Australia. So what that means is that your child will have both Canadian and Australian citizenship. So typically in the past, what we've done is that what clients have done is, on getting home, then apply for Australian citizenship. You can have a migration agent who's experienced in this area apply on your behalf. Typically, they will get a response from the Department of Home Affairs approving citizenship in 1 to 2 weeks after they lodge. Or if you are more careful with your money and you want to do it yourselves and believe that you're competent to do it yourselves, and there isn't great complexity with it, then you can do it yourselves, and that process will take between 2 to 4 months. On coming back, you will have a 90-day tourist electronic travel authority period for your child to be in Australia. Well, obviously, if it's 4 months that exceeds that 90 days, you obtain a bridging visa from the Department of Home Affairs to bridge that gap between when that time runs out and when the application is determined. And there's no great difficulty in obtaining that. However, there have been delays with coronavirus, and there may be another way of obtaining Australian citizenship. There may be delays sufficient in obtaining Canadian passport that you go, okay, well, here is an alternative means. In the past, I've never recommended Australian intended parents who are in Canada or the US then obtaining Australian citizenship over there, because you have to lodge offshore, in other words, in Canada or the United States, and while there, wait until the citizenship application is determined. You can't then apply for an electronic travel authority or visa to come to Australia until that citizenship application is decided, and that typically takes 2 to 4 months. Most intended parents who are not living in Canada, of course, don't want to do that. They don't want to waste 2 to 4 months in Canada, much as Canada is a lovely place. Paying rent in Canada plus the mortgage here adds up to a very expensive proposition, and not being settled at home is extremely stressful, both to the parents and then ultimately to the child. So that's always been the process in the past to obtain the Electronic Travel Authority. With the current requirements to obtain a visa, I've seen one case where a migration agent managed to persuade the Department of Home Affairs to apply for a couple who are clients of mine in the United States to apply onshore. In other words, he applied within Australia for Australian citizenship for the child, and due to their urgent circumstances was able to obtain that approval overnight. I certainly don't see that as a general rule. I would be very cautious about putting an application in for Australian citizenship if you're in Canada, because you might find yourselves, if you're not doing it carefully, at the end of a queue of 2 to 4 months when your time in Canada is limited to 90 days. So careful advice from an Australian migration agent, or certainly an experienced lawyer undertaking surrogacy as to what the alternative options are, is certainly warranted first, and not venturing out on that application for citizenship in Canada.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate you answering those last few questions for us. We will have Leia join us on screen now. Thank you again.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leia Swanberg. I'm the founder of Canadian Fertility Consulting, and it is just such a pleasure to be on this webinar this evening with two amazing lawyers. And I often find myself outnumbered by lawyers, and it's absolutely the best. I suggest every client who comes to us to connect with a lawyer in their jurisdiction before proceeding ever. And the reason I do that is, you know, I travel a lot, and when I'm in France or in Australia or in Germany or Spain, the laws there are so different. Every law is very different than a law I may experience in Canada. And so I want to ensure that before I allow anyone into our surrogacy program, that they've spoken to someone that's able to give them great advice in their country, and to ensure that when they engage with our agency, another agency, or have a sister, cousin, friend who lives in Canada and they're going to engage directly with her for surrogacy, that they really understand what their laws tell them about surrogacy. And then once they figured that out, speaking to another lawyer in Canada to find out what the laws in Canada say, what the laws say about surrogacy, and how to engage in the most or in the safest way legally, in the safest way ethically, and of course in a way that allows them to feel really connected to this process. Many of our clients, and over the last 12 years, we've worked with, I want to say, hundreds of clients from Australia, and they have all proven to us that the Australian people really understand Canada, and that our styles are very similar, from lifestyle to prenatal health care to midwives versus obstetrical care, home births versus hospital. We find it's just been a great pairing. And so for us, and for me specifically being on this webinar, if you are an intended parent in Australia and you have unfortunately not been able to find a surrogate in Australia, we welcome you. And I joke all the time because I'm on the phone with clients and they say, well, do you do gay surrogacy? And I'm like, I laugh because I don't know what that is. In Canada, we just have surrogacy, and we're really lucky in that way. And so, we are happy to care for clients, whoever they are. We want to make sure first that you're legally protected. And then once you've got that box checked, we're going to refer you to a fertility clinic in Canada that will either partner with your clinic in Australia in bringing your embryos here to Canada, which we have had amazing success with. If you don't have embryos and you are starting from scratch, or you're looking for an egg donor, we will put you in touch with those people. So my husband actually runs our egg donor program. One of my kids works there doing intakes and support for donors. So I'll introduce you to them. Their program is called Egg Helpers. And, we always suggest lawyer, clinic, egg donor, surrogate. And we do that because we really want to ensure that each piece of the process is an individualized process based on your needs. Surrogacy is not a one size fits all process. For us, it's about finding out what you are looking for, the type of relationship with an egg donor, as Stephen said, whether that's a known donor or an anonymous donor. I myself have been a donor a bunch of times, as have two of my two oldest daughters. And, I've been a known donor, I've been an anonymous donor with open ID. And for me, egg donation was such a beautiful experience, as was surrogacy. And so while I may want to recreate that for you, a beautiful relationship for you with a surrogate or an egg donor may look very different. So our role at Canadian Fertility Consulting, and I believe the role of all agencies, really is to hold space for you and to help you sort through what a beautiful relationship looks like. Whether that's a big, huge relationship, or whether you're a little more reserved and want to wait until you're, at a pregnancy viability to really start jumping up and down and creating that closeness with the surrogate. For us, it's about finding out what it is you're looking for, pairing you with, a clinic that shares your values, an egg donor who is looking for the same relationship that you are, and a surrogate who is looking to build this relationship at a pace that you're comfortable with. We put all the pieces in place. We suggest a lawyer, a clinic, egg donor, agency. We then start sending you surrogate profiles. Our program is similar to many in Canada. It is illegal here to be paid for matching. We match you for free. We invite you back a couple weeks later to decide if you'd like to move forward with our services and pay our fees and move forward with the case management and administrative process. And we support you from beginning to end until you travel home. As Stephen said, traveling home generally is very easy. COVID has made it a little tougher. And, so we've worked very diligently, as Alex said, with the working group, creating a really clear path for our international clients to travel home. It's, it's important for us that we are able to reassure any surrogate in our program that the intended parents are coming for their baby. And so the moment we heard that borders were closing and that was becoming more difficult, we got real busy, real fast in terms of, talking to Global Affairs and talking to Immigration Canada and talking to Passport Canada to ensure that we could keep this process moving forward for people, as we've just been heartbroken watching the process in the US and how there are many people who aren't able to get to their children in time for the birth. And so we are really committed to not only our intended parents and creating a safe path for them, but we're also take our surrogates' health very seriously. And we know that, having your intended parents here is so important. Having your having your birth plan respected, and so we've worked diligently to get all intended parents here so far to be present at the birth, and it's been absolutely fantastic to see the Canadian government step forward to work through that for international clients traveling to Canada. Our model is very simple. It's insulate the relationship with your surrogate so tightly that the rest is details that the lawyers can work on. Us as your agency, we can help you with. We have a full team. Your surrogate will have a support person. Your surrogate will have a finance team member who will help her with receipts and organizing and coordinating and making sure that her travel and her ultrasounds and all of those pieces are taken care of. And you as intended parents will have a support person and a finance person to help you understand your surrogate's expenses and receipts. You'll also have a case manager who will work with you until you're matched, and then as well throughout your journey. I currently am working as intended parent support. During COVID-19, I really wanted to step forward, not only as a CEO, but to ensure that all of our intended parents understood that we take any health, any pandemics. I mean, we haven't been in this position before, but any health issues really seriously. And so serious issues require my serious attention. And so I'm working as intended parent support, and it's been amazing just to connect with so many great intended parents who are just so beautifully committed to becoming parents. And so when you connect with us, I'm one of the first people that you'll speak to, and then you'll be assigned a case manager, likely Stephanie Wilden, as she manages the majority of our clients from Australia and supports them to get matched and carry through to the end of their journey. And there are so many details about surrogacy, but tonight really I wanted, or today, this morning for you in Australia, I really wanted to focus on the legal aspects of surrogacy and allow the lawyers to explain to you how important the legal process is, because I know for us at CFC, it is the most important process. And so I really want to take this opportunity to thank both Alex and Stephen for participating. All I can say is if you are a lawyer, or if you are an intended parent in Australia and you don't know Stephen Page, you need to. He really has helped so many of our clients. He has gone above and beyond so often. So please absolutely reach out to him. He'll be a fantastic resource for you, whether it's figuring out how to get your embryos out of Australia, how to get yourselves out of Australia, how to engage in the process in Canada, what your specific state requires you to have in the legal agreement, which, up until 6 years ago, I didn't know was a thing. But I'm so glad that Stephen provided us that information, and it's been, so valuable to us. So thank you, Alex and Stephen. Jordan, if there's any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Hi, Leah. Just one quick question from a couple of hopeful intended parents. They know that recording an intro video to start the process is really important, and they would just like to know a quick tip that you have for that video that they'd like to produce.
Absolutely. So part of our process is to have intended parents create a short, 2 minutes, literally like holding up your phone. This is who we are. For those of you who aren't videographers or aren't really great with that technology, you could just compile a whole bunch of photos and find an app that will allow you to link them together and have some music in the background. Surrogates want to see you. They want to know who you are. They want to see pictures of your dogs, if you have dogs, or of your children. They would like to know what your hobbies are. Explain yourselves in 2 minutes. Really share your passions and why becoming parents is so important, and and how you approach this process in terms of, you know, maybe your history as to why you're unable to carry yourself, or just a little bit more about the rest of your family and how loved this child will be as a surrogate. That's really everything. It's all we can ask for.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Leah. Stephen and Alex, we'd love to have you join back on screen. For everyone watching today, we'll make sure that we provide everyone's contact information so that you can book a one-on-one consultation with them. If you have any further questions for Alex or Stephen or CFC, we can put you in touch with Steph Wilden. If you have any other questions, please let us know, and thanks for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
I just mentioned briefly at the end that Air Canada has stopped services between Brisbane, Sydney and Vancouver. So there is some thinking that it's not possible to get over to Canada. It is. It's a United service from Sydney to San Francisco and then transfer to Canada. There's no great difficulty. Once you got permission to leave Australia and permission to get into Canada, then there's no great difficulty taking that flight.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. It's so great to see you both on this webinar, and I hope that we will be enjoying a great drink together, celebrating in Australia when this is all over, and Stephen, meeting your new baby. Congratulations. She's so adorable.
Well, what has been great about this webinar is that the soundproofing in this room has been pretty good, because at various times she's not been the best behaved baby.
She's talking, Stephen. She's talking. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll talk to you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.